Right, good afternoon everyone, and good afternoon to certainly the streaming audience that comes into these council chambers. Obviously, welcome to all the members of the gallery that are here today. I'm sure that very much aware that on the agenda today is a very, very important item, certainly for people in the chamber, certainly for councillors, and certainly for a lot of people over the last 10 years. So appreciate very much your presence here today, and hopefully we can all walk around here with a resolution today. A bit of housekeeping, I suppose, as I said before, toilets out the side, water over there if you need it. We do have standing orders in the chamber, so just in case you've forgotten, mobile phones, we like to switch them to silent. We know people, some people have emergency services responsibilities, or the people that need to get in contact with them, so you can just have your phones on silent. We'll tolerate that during the meeting. And just as so for those people that actually haven't been to the chamber before or haven't actually watched one of our meetings online, you might see on your chairs today there's actually just a notice regarding our closed meetings, and rather than being an issue of transparency, it's actually when council has to discuss items of a sensitive nature, and it goes in there telling you what those reasons would be. So today, just coincidentally, and you may not be here to discuss some items on that agenda because you won't have seen it, but there's 4 items on there that council wishes to discuss, and that might have someone's name in it, there might be some dollar values in it, there might be some issues around safety, and those sorts of things have got to be discussed in private because they're not for disclosure until there's been a decision made about them, and then the meeting will open and those decisions are made. So it's not about transparency, it's just about protecting obviously those sensitive issues until such time as we have a resolution. So that's why we have the closed meeting section. So before we do that though, usually we like to get the most part of our business over and done with and discussed here, so that then if when we go into that closed session, people can leave and go about their business. So look, once again, thank you all very much for coming. We also at the on the first Tuesday of our meeting cycle, at the first Tuesday of the month, we have someone here to say a prayer with us, and once I start the meeting off, I'll ask Steve Gillespie to lead us in a prayer today. Anyhow, look, councillors, our meeting is now open. I see everyone is present. Are there any apologies? I don't think there are. Now, leave of absence, councillors, for the next little while. Yes, Councillor Roll.
Mayor, I have a leave of absence for the general meeting, the 26th of April, please.
26th of April. Someone like to move that, please? Moved by Councillor Brindlecombe, seconded. Councillor Lacey, all in favour? Against? Thank you very much. Thanks, Christine. Anyone else?
Only the 9th of May.
9th of May. Councillor Lacey. Someone want to move that? Moved by Councillor Roll, seconded Councillor McIndoe. All in favour? Against? Thanks, Dave.
So just for clarity, through the Mayor, that's for all committee meetings, particularly the Leadership and Governance Committee meeting and the General meeting?
Correct, that conference is on
that
So
day. Right, Councillor Brindlecombe, you're in on that as well, so that'll be the communities meeting?
Yes.
Leadership?
And leadership and
The general meeting?
Yeah.
all 4.
All 4. All right, someone move Councillor Brindlecombe. Moved by Councillor Nixon, seconded Councillor Lacey. All in favour? Against? Thank you. Right, we might just pause there briefly. You sure everyone else is right? All good. Okay, very good. Right, well, our special guest today is Pastor Steve Gillespie from the Church of the Baptist Church. Steve, if you could lead us off today, on a day I suspect when we might need some prayers and some help, so
well,
lead us off.
We're in good hands when we look to the Lord. I just might open, as soon as we come into Easter, can I just read us the scripture out of leading to the Passion of the Christ in John 19. Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." It's always a great privilege to be able to come and read and speak God's word to those in our community who have a position of power and authority, a place of responsibility. But I guess even as we read the scripture coming into Easter, I just wonder whether I'd like to be able to take the opportunity to pray for our council and to pray for our community, that we would not get ahead of ourselves, but rather that we would remember that there is no authority or power given among men save that which is given from above. And even today, we can ask the living God for wisdom to exercise power and authority that is in keeping with his goodwill and purpose. Pilate ended up giving away his opportunity. But each one of us here today, in our own spheres of life, have our own place of power and authority. But for each of us, just to reflect and to think about who's put me in that place. And that question, the answer to that, should put us in a place of humility rather than a place of arrogance. It should put us in a place where we want to serve because we are accountable for the authority that we've been given. Little or great, each one of us is accountable. I trust that the Lord would encourage us through this word, that we would know his leading. And I want to pray that now, that you as a council and our community would know the grace of God, and that we would know his enablement in the power and the authority for which we exercise. Father, I want to pray for this council. I want to thank you for the Central Highlands region. I want to thank you for the great blessings that you've poured out upon this region. And I want to thank you, God, that we can look to you for wisdom. Lord God, even in relation to the past challenges that this region has faced, and even the attempts and the decisions being made by this council in order to better face the future as a community. Lord God, we acknowledge that no power and no authority is held in this room apart from you giving that authority and giving that power. And therefore, Lord God, we need your wisdom. And I ask on behalf of this council today that we might have your wisdom, that we as a community would have wisdom as we make decisions, as this council makes decisions. Lord God, even as we face relationships with one another and how we resolve issues, I pray that we would face them with humility, and I pray, God, that we would have your wisdom, and that, Lord, that we might be able to give glory and honour to you, that you have given us this opportunity to exercise leadership and responsibility. May you help us to do what's right. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Yes.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, and it's become seriously obvious in this moment that, and certainly after Steve's appropriate prayer, that we certainly are in the time of Easter. And I thank Deputy Mayor Gale for decorating our chamber this morning, some Easter additions, and also very mindful of the fact that our Sunflower Festival happens obviously for the next week, and we've obviously made sure that we've got some fresh sunflowers in our chamber to remind us of what's important to us. I think Steve's prayer was very, very apt, and I hope that the wisdom and the right decisions are forthcoming today. Councillors, moving back to our agenda, we're now looking at the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting from the 28th of March. Would someone that was present here like to move those? Moved by Councillor Rolfe, seconded by Councillor Brindlecombe. Now that dealt with a couple of development applications, and there was an LGIP there, I think, the Local Government Infrastructure Plan. in attendance at the conferences. Any business arising out of there? This seems fairly straightforward. All right, all in favour? Against? Thank you. All right, the review of those outstanding meeting actions. Is there anything in there that is frightening someone? I think significantly that list now seems to be very proactive and people are working through those. Some stuff in there on the agenda today, so council happy with those. Sorry, happy, yep. Material personal interest, conflicts of interest, personal gifts and benefits, please.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Who's the green rabbit? So that, is that next month's houses?
Sorry, councillor Dent.
Oh, the only thing I just wanted to highlight was with regards to the discussion on levies that we're having later on in the meeting. I performed a role as a contractor back in 2014 on with regards to community engagement for council. So I just want to make people aware of that. There's obviously
Microphone.
Sorry, I've got some. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that to the room and make people aware of that, and obviously that doesn't impact on my ability to make a decision.
Thank you very much, councillor Dent. Any other personal conflicts? I should say that, personal gifts, conflicts of interest. All good? Well, that'll be just noted. Thank you, councillor Daniels. Any petitions made, Mr. CEO?
No, Mr. Mayor.
No, good. All right, our committee recommendations and notes, minutes of the audit committee meeting, 27th of March. Someone who was present there like to move those? Moved by councillor Robb, seconded. Councillor Brindle. All in favour? Against? Thank you. Pretty straightforward. All right. I think we get to the main game. Councillors, today on the infrastructure and utilities section, we need Ben Master from ACOM to come down and present his report. Today, obviously, we deal with the page 25 of the agendas, deals with get to it there, the Levee business case report, animal flood protection scheme. And Ben has actually got a presentation he'll actually work through. So you've got that actually with you? Ready to go, all ready to go. Okay, so so I'll ask Scott Mason, our CEO, just to might lead it in. There's a couple of introductions to do there and we'll get the item underway. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just in terms of process for the benefit of the gallery, we'll start with a presentation from Ben McMaster from AECOM, and he'll present the key findings of the Levee business case. From there may be a number of questions and comments from the councillors, and what's proposed in the form of a report today is a recommended course of action to deal with the matter and to make a decision on what to do regarding flood protection for the emerald community, and it's in part based on the findings from this study. So I think with that, Mr. Mayor, we can refer to Ben and have him deliver his presentation.
Right. Yep. Well, firstly,
before you start, Ben, you'll have to be very loud voice today because everyone wants to hear this. It's pretty important. So thank you.
around it. Well, firstly, I just wanted to say, thanks for the opportunity to come present today. As a business, I guess ACOM, we've been involved with this project for a few years now, from the feasibility study through to now. And we're obviously appreciate the opportunity to present our findings for Council's consideration. I'll just step through, I guess, the technical outputs. There's a number of items you can see there, and they're basically the deliverables from our project. we were sort of first engaged mid last year by council to undertake this project, and it basically wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. So starting at the very top of the business case report, that's the obvious main document. But there's also a number of other reports which you can see there, which relate to the business case, and ultimately each of those reports as a standalone report provide inputs to the overall business case report. The reference project that's discussed in the business case, as most of you are aware, is the Emerald Flood Protection Scheme, which consists of a system of 6 levees. So there's 6 individual levees you can see up there. We started at the yellow Summer West levee, working our way down the river. We've got the golf course levee and then through to Moffat Road levee, and then on the other side of the river, again, Lakeside levee in the blue, Rifle Range levee in the green, and Cotamora levee in the orangey colour. Total length of the system is approximately 15.7 kilometres. This project, as it stands, is probably the largest levee project being considered in the state at the moment. The design flood immunity of the system is an obvious key part of it. So in terms of the immunity of the system, we've looked at the design flood event, which council have elected to use in their planning scheme. That level of immunity is equivalent, which you can see there, it's approximately a 1 in 200 year flood event in today's terms. But in reality, that event incorporates climate change, which is about a 1 in 100 year event out to year 2100. So that selection of that immunity for that project was something that was considered by the previous council during the feasibility phase, and it was elected to proceed with that level of immunity for the project, and that's what we've taken forward into the business case. I will also just note that the actual levee crest height then accounts for freeboard. So we have obviously a design flood height, and then we allow a ½ metre freeboard on top of that for the ultimate levee crest. There's a few slides here I'll just flip through. The levee system, due to its nature, it's through brownfield and brownfield sites for the most part. It means that we have to adopt a number of different types of levees along the system. The earth levee, which you can see up at the moment, that's the most typical. When people think of levees, that's normally what they think of. And we have used this earth levee configuration for the most part throughout the system, purely because it's the most cost effective. And also there's a number of, I guess, in terms of risk and for seepage and stability, earth levees make the most sense. There's a few examples that we've got there in other areas around the state. The one on the right is in Mackay, so it's really just giving an indication of what that can look like. There's no one size fits all, to be honest. The landscaping treatments and how the actual earth levels look is dependent on the environment and sensitive receptors. We do then have a number of sections where the levee will actually be a road, so it will double as a road. Examples of that are Moffat Road and Cotamora Road. These sections will, again, they're typical of an earth levee embankment, but they have an increased crest width to allow 2 lanes of traffic. It's obviously sealed, and the batters are 1 in 4 for vehicle safety. Where space then limits us to fit a full earth levee type arrangement, we have considered the use of crib wall arrangements, which you can see there. And there are a few locations where we are proposing the use of a crib wall system due to space limitations. And lastly, flood walls, vertical flood walls, are generally used where there's no space to fit any of the other systems. They are almost a last resort. You can see there's a number of issues associated with flood walls from a visual amenity perspective. There's also a significantly larger cost in constructing flood walls, and also ongoing operations and maintenance of flood walls as well. But we do have a few sections of the levee system which does require the use of vertical flood walls. Lastly, here we have a few areas, and this is a vertical flood wall, but we do get to some areas where the geotechnical, in situ geotechnical conditions and the height of the levee requires a buttress type arrangement, which you can see a typical example of that with the buttresses. The whole idea there is to transfer the load obviously from the to prevent the overturning moment on that wall. The levee system is,
Even that would have some limitations though, how did it go, to what height could you use that?
yeah, so this levee has been designed up with the highest flood wall that we have is around about 4.5 metres in height. So, you know, you get too much higher than that and you have some mix of dramas. There's a significant amount of associated infrastructure with the levee project as well. I've nominated those up on the slide. Just working through those, there's 11 demandable gate structures. So these are crossings where existing roads will be crossing through the levee system. So normal operations, those would be open, and then prior to a flood event, the demountable barriers would be placed in those gate openings. There's 70 metres of temporary flood barrier, and the intent is to use that across the Capricorn Highway and the central rail line. The reason for that is to terminate the levees on either side of the road, and due to a number of issues with PDP services and with obviously crossing a fairly major road and rail system, the use of a temporary demountable barrier is preferential than trying to put a permanent system across that section.
Ben, can you tell me a little bit about the temporary demountable barrier? What height or how long does it take to construct?
Yep, so the barrier that because we're up, obviously a bit higher up along Opal Street, the barrier we're looking at is up to around 1.5 metres in height. To be honest, they come in half-metre increments, so you'd probably look to use a 2 metre high barrier through that section. As an example, the system in Rockhampton, which was used during this last event, is about 150 metres of barrier. Took them about a day to put it up. Given that there's 7 or 8 days notice in Rockhampton, that was very manageable. So that was 1 or 2 guys doing that work. So the intent here would be to obviously put that system of 70 metres out. You know, you'd hope you can do that in 3 or 4 hours is what the manufacturers have spoken to us about.
So you could still leave egress
Right to the end. Yeah.
right to the end.
So normally there's an operations plan which would normally go hand in hand with that, and yes, you'd allow a gap right to the end and then prevent obviously use of that to traffic and then close off completely. So the other associated infrastructure, so we've got 35 banks of culverts. Those culverts are penetrating the levee system. They're to allow local drainage and stormwater to basically go through the levee and go along natural drainage paths into the river. Those culverts all have backflow prevention devices to prevent the Goa River from backing up through those culverts and into the levee system. We're looking at 3 interior stormwater pump stations, all on the golf course Summer West side of the river. Those pump stations are located there to deal with concurrent flooding. So if there was to be an Goa River event, and then there was to be a fairly extreme local catchment rainfall event occur at the same time, the pump stations are there to deal with that runoff from the local catchment, pump it over the levee. We also have one detention basin, which is on the opposite side, which is adjacent to Marist College within council-owned land. And similarly, that's there to store local stormwater runoff, should there be the concurrent events occurring in the river and also in a local catchment rainfall event. There are several passive relief wells that we have specified for the project as well. We have a couple of areas where we are crossing deep sandy gravel layers, and the concern is obviously with seepage entering those layers, in some cases 15, 20, 25 metres below surface, and then obviously that seepage coming into the levee area. The use of passive relief wells basically allow those to be drilled down to about 25 to 30 metres and to bring those seepage flows to the surface on the interior side of the levee, and then to ultimately drain those towards the pump stations to be pumped over. Landside drainage channels I've just sort of spoken about. So on the interior side of the levee, there's a system of landside drainage channels which again direct interior flows and seepage to localised positions where we've got pump stations or detention. We have a number of services or PUP relocations or protections. Those have been assessed based on the limited information that we could gather from council and the authorities. That is a risk in itself, that there hasn't been detailed potholing and physical location of some of those services, and that would have to be something that would be done if council were to take this project forward. At this stage, Ergon have provided their own estimates for relocation of their infrastructure, and the majority of the other conflict structure with council-owned infrastructure are water and sewer services, basically. We have a number of transition structures which then transition between the levee types. I've indicated those on the drawings, and then we have a number of access ramps to allow vehicle access up onto the crest. Passing bays on the crest where there's crest widening to allow vehicles to pass each other when there's inspections being carried out. And there's also turnaround points to allow vehicles to turn around up on the crest. Quick summary of the key technical investigations. So from a geotechnical perspective, there was additional geotechnical investigations carried out prior to us commencing the business case. So we've used that information and we've basically undertaken further analysis focused on confirmation of the levee types, confirming the seepage flows, the substructure design, assessing settlement, short and long-term settlement, and also looking at potential sources for borrow material for the project. The intent at this stage is to go with a homogeneous earth embankment. Previously in the feasibility, we looked at the potential for a zoned embankment. Key reason for that is that council at that stage may have had material coming out of the river, which could have been used for shell material. At this stage, that's looking less likely, and that's why we've got a homogeneous earth embankment. We have approximately 600,000 cubic metres of fill available at a potential borrow source that's been identified, and it has been modelled to show that it's sufficient for use in the project. There's approximately another 300,000 cubes still required, which would have to come from a secondary borrow source. So that's a current risk for the project, that amount of fill would have to come from somewhere and then potentially close to the project to avoid significant haulage costs. Civil structural, previous work, concept work in the feasibility was carried out based on aerial survey through LiDAR. There's now been field survey captured by council and provided to us for the business case. That's been incorporated into the design. As I mentioned before, we've looked at PEP conflicts and assessed where we need to move some of those services or treat them in place. There's also been structural analysis completed for the vertical flood walls and the gates. And then we've confirmed at this stage that there's approximately 890 or call it 900,000 cubic metres of fill required compacted in place for the project. So it's a significant amount of fill material required for the project, as was expected. Preliminary design drawings have been produced, and that supported the development of a bill of quantities and then a cost estimate. We have assessed in the business case further traffic and transport implications of haulage operations. What we have looked at is a number of the key intersections and looking at how a contractor may haul the fill material from the primary borrow source to the levees. At this stage, we're expecting that there's fairly minimal impacts to intersection performance. However, there's expected to be fairly significant impacts to actual pavement life and resulting in pavement damage. That's both on state-controlled roads, which are TMR roads, and also council's own road network. As shown up there, the estimated value for TMR for pavement contribution is expected to be in the order of $500,000. And in terms of reinstating council's roads after the haulage operations, the estimate's approximately $4 million for rehabilitation costs. Drainage and hydraulics, there's been an assessment of the Nagoa River events. Previous work undertaken by others during the feasibility study, we've taken that modelling further into this business case and undertaken a number of simulations for the Nagoa River flooding external to the levee, obviously. We've also developed detailed models for the interior catchment runoff and assessed a number of scenarios looking at the implications of concurrent events occurring where we've got Nagoa River flooding and also interior catchment runoff occurring. As I said earlier, we've got 35 culverts that have been sized and confirmed, 3 pump stations. We are looking at that detention basin adjacent to Morris College. And we've assessed scour protection as well. the levee system. In terms of planning and approvals and environment, we've completed a review of environmental factors and an environmental management plan, and we've had a pre-lodgement meeting with the project team, which included staff from the state government departments, so local government and planning, DAF, DHP and DNRM all attended that. There's been a EPBC self-assessment carried out, and the final field investigations are required now if council were to proceed with the project to confirm that EPBC referral is required. The project site will traverse several contaminated land parcels, which we've made provision of the cost estimates for rehabilitation of those sites during construction. Cultural heritage inspections and a formal cultural heritage management plan haven't been produced in the business case. At council's request, they've been deferred to a detailed design phase should the project go forward. Approval requirements have now been assessed, and all of the estimated approval fees have been incorporated into the cost estimate, and our approvals register basically spell out for council the timings required and the likely approvals associated with the project. Risk mitigation or assessment of risk is obviously a key part of the business case as well. And so there's been a rigorous assessment of risk carried out as we went through the project. There's a number of key risks identified in the business case. Probably the key ones though are shown up on the screen there. We're aware of an issue with Sentinel Property Group and the shopping centre, and their view would be to move the levee alignment closer to Maxwell Drive and across the Cap Highway further down away from them to avoid visual amenity impacts. The issue with that is that that's unfortunately going against what Transport and Main Roads would prefer, and so there's a risk there that the project, if it was to proceed, would have to try and find a balance between both those key stakeholders. Secondary risks that we've identified is obviously that requirement for additional fill material and having to find that from a secondary borrow source. In terms of cost implications, that's probably one of the most major because fill costs are a large component of the overall cost of the project. So being able to find that secondary borrow source in fairly close proximity to the levee project is going to be key if the project was to proceed. As discussed before, PUP or services, there's some unknowns there which would require additional physical locations to be undertaken before final treatments and relocations can be confirmed. There's also a number there are predicted to be afflux impacts due to the project. The hydraulics report is very clear to show council a whole range of design flood events as required by the Queensland levee regulation. There's a significant amount of mapping, which we've included in volume 2 of that report, which shows council the expected number of additional buildings impacted through a range of different events due to the levee project. That includes not just external Nagoa River flooding, but also shows council the potential impacts to buildings in an interior catchment event if it was to coincide with the Nagoa River event. In terms of our internal process or design reviews, we've had a challenge team put together from our United States business, and we've had our levee practice lead for the United States review a number of our reports and drawings throughout this process. We've conducted an independent road safety audit and also undertaken constructability reviews and workshops, which also include safety design reviews as well. And we've had some reviews and initial feedback from Queensland Government's Chief Engineer, who has also taken a look at the project. In terms of stakeholder interactions, we've had consultation has generally been focused on Queensland departments, particularly, as I said earlier, Diligent, DNRM, DAF, DHP, TMR and QR. Several of those are asset owners that we potentially may be impacting due to the project, and others are concurrent agencies from an approvals perspective. We've had 2 briefings as a project team with state government representatives associated with funding implications, so that we can provide further guidance in the business case for council in considering that. We have had some discussions as well with other key stakeholders who would be physically impacted by the levee. They include Sentinel Property Group, the Emerald Golf Course, the Emerald Pony Club, Morris College and BMA. During the business case, there were no additional community consultation undertaken at the request of the council. That's being handled by council separately. In terms of anticipated project impacts, there's a number of items there. Sort of stepping down through those, we have obviously the levee would impact property owners, where the levee is going to physically traverse their sites. There's also going to be impacts to individual business stakeholders, which would need to be managed by offset works. So the likes of the golf course and Morris College have put forward works to offset the physical impact of the levee. There's anticipated to be full acquisition of 32 properties, of which 22 of those properties have existing dwellings. And then in association with that, there's also partial acquisition or easements over a further 26 properties. The modelling is clearly shown, and as indicated in the flood mapping, that there will be increased flood heights outside the levee area in the Gull River events. And there's also anticipated increased flood heights inside the levee area in some areas due to local catchment events, although we've managed those impacts somewhat by our interior pump stations and detention, but not fully offset those impacts. So we've shown those in the report. Environmental and cultural heritage impacts would also need to be appropriately managed during construction. We've put forward an approvals register and shown council the steps and the way forward there. There would be minor traffic delays during construction due to haulage operations, and probably more specifically, there would be significant damage to existing pavements, both TMR and also council-owned roads. There's also visual amenity impacts potentially, particularly for Sentinel Property Group and also other associated landholders adjacent to the levee. Some of this can be managed through associated landscaping and other treatments, but you need to be considerate that any major project like this particular levee structure will have some visual amenity impacts that can't be offset. In terms of the anticipated benefits, current flood mapping, which I show you there, that's the existing conditions under a defined flood event, which is the design immunity of the levee system, and it's obvious that a significant portion of the township is inundated, particularly West Emerald, and the situation with the project is shown there. So in terms of benefits, it's obvious that given that this is a flood mitigation project, that's its major benefit. It offsets flood damage and impacts to private properties and obviously other infrastructure owners. Key points are up there. So in a defined flood event, the project would protect approximately 2,400 residential buildings and a further 650 commercial buildings from flooding. It would allow for increased evacuation time west, but obviously the levees aren't going to improve evacuation across the river. That would require upgrades to the bridges that are currently in place. The net tangible damage costs are expected to be reduced by approximately $4.5 to $5 million per annum as a result of the levee. So that's an ongoing benefit. The damage assessments and the economics have shown that the levee would basically pay for itself in a single 1% AEP event. So something similar to a 2010-11 event. If that was to occur with the levee in place, it would have almost paid for itself in direct benefits. The Insurance Council of Australia were requested to provide council with a estimate of insurance premium reductions. They have recorded an estimate of about $3 million per annum reduction in insurance premiums if the project was to proceed. There's associated benefits with any mitigation project, and that's around reduced disaster management costs, reduced social impacts, and there is a potential for improved property values over time, although that's very hard to define, to be honest. In terms of the nitty-gritty, so getting to the cost estimate, we've had updated resumption estimates provided to us by council through Option, who undertook an updated evaluation. Our estimate includes principals obligations, so in those principals obligation costs, we've got the cost for approvals of permits, detailed designs, stakeholder offsets, resumptions and legal costs, the road pavement costs, and then construction administration, and then associated fees and charges as well. That's all in the principals obligations. We have excluded any extensive landscaping and park construction. That's seen as an additional council would go with that. We have included planned and unplanned risk allowances in the estimate. We have assumed that the 600,000 cubic metres of fill will come from the primary borrow source, but then a further 300,000 would have to come from a secondary source within 30 kilometres of the project site. We've got electrical and DUP relocation costs provided by Ergon, which has been included in the estimate. The current assumption is that a tier 2 contractor would construct these works if the project was to go ahead, and the accuracy of the estimates around plus 20%, minus 15% in terms of accuracy at this stage, at a preliminary design stage. So apologies, there's a few numbers up there which may be a bit hard to read, but I guess the headline numbers, there's 2 estimates provided. They're both risk-adjusted estimates. One's a P50 and one's a P90. If we look at the P90 estimate, we've got a total construction cost of approximately 137 million, with the principal's cost of about $26 million on top of that, bringing the total construction cost to approximately $163.7 million. With risk contingency, we're looking at about $24.3 million of risk contingency. So adding that brings the number to 188 million for a P90 risk adjusted estimate. Allowing for escalation and Q lead cost then brings the total outturn cost of the project to approximately 199.9 million. So just a touch under 200 million for the P90 estimate. Ongoing costs are also considered in the economic valuation, so there's going to be maintenance costs that council and the community through the ratepayers would have to pay for, so their costs around inspections, routine inspections, mowing, operations, staff training, replacements and the like. The operational costs need to cover, obviously, the events that would occur during a flood event. The costs are likely to be in the order of the stage of 200 to 350,000 a year. But to be honest, there needs to be a final operations manual and emergency manual produced till that can be finally clarified on what the expected ongoing expenditures will be for the levee project. At this stage, that estimate's based on other levee projects around the state and also from our US business who have provided some benchmarking data for that figure. The business case economics, again, there's a fair bit of text up there, but we've had 9 Squared, who are our economics partner. They've undertaken an economic evaluation to support the business case. They've looked at, obviously, a number of benefits. The direct benefits are reduced flood damage, reduction in negative social impacts associated with the flood, reduced agricultural land impacts, and residual value of the project, the direct benefits. They've also considered separately other indirect benefits, and those are the reduction in insurance premiums and improved property values. At our request, we've asked them to show those 2 separately, to show council clearly what the economic outcome would be for direct benefits only, and then what the outcome would be with the indirect included as well. Purely because we believe that there is the potential, and 9 Squared agree, that there can be some double counting in trying to show both the direct and indirect, because when it comes to reduced flood damage, that's actually borne by insurers. So by pulling the insurance premium reductions into that, there is, from our perspective, there's a concern that there's double counting there in the economic evaluation. So hence the reason why we've shown the direct benefits only, and then a scenario with the indirect. The costs that are obviously included, the P50 cost, which is fairly standard for an economic evaluation to use the P50 cost, and the ongoing costs for operations and maintenance are also included there. In terms of the headline economic results, again, the report talks in a lot more detail around sensitivities and exactly what the numbers are showing, but primarily what it's indicating is that the project's very marginal when you look at the direct benefits and at a cash rate of 7%. So BCR is less than 1, around the 0.97 for the 7% discount rate and for direct benefits only. And then we've shown a number of sensitivities obviously with indirect added, and then also showing council the sensitivity of the BCR should cash rates go up or down. So that's probably the key outcome from the economics. It's very marginal project from an economic benefit perspective. In terms of project delivery, that's always a key part of the business case as well, is to show council the way forward if that was a decision that council made. We have looked at delivery options. We've noted them up there, a number of contract delivery options, undertaken a workshop and assessed that for this particular project based on the risk assessment. Our recommendation is that if council were to proceed, that it look at a design and construct with an early tenderer involvement process. We believe that would provide the best value for money for council moving forward. We've also put forward a recommendation for an early works package. Again, if council were to consider this project, we believe that's a sensible move to undertake an early works package, which would consist of property acquisitions, PDP relocations, and offset works to some of the physically impacted stakeholders prior to the main contract being awarded, because a tier 2 contractor will be able to undertake the works far more efficiently if those early works had been carried out. At this stage, we've allowed for a construction program of 30 months, and that's incorporated into the escalation and cost estimate that we've provided. That is a conservative construction program. We have done independent constructability reviews, and we've had a few staff who are ex-contractors who have looked at this, and the likelihood is that for a major earthworks project like this, a tier 2 contractor would probably get it done in 12 to 18 months if there was the ability to do so and if funding cash flow allowed for it. What that would mean for council is that there would be a potential saving of $10 to $15 million in escalation and overheads for a contractor, tier 2 contractor. So at this stage, we prefer to be conservative. We're adopting the 30-month program and all the costs and economics, but it's just for the council to be aware that there is an opportunity to make savings if you wanted to go that way. In terms of funding mechanisms and approach, the existing state government funding programs aren't suitable for a project of this size and nature. That's been confirmed as well by staff from Diligent. They've noted that council would be required to make its formal submission to Queensland Cabinet Budget Review Committee, and there would obviously need to be significant discussions with government prior to that actually happening. Funding at this stage appears to be unlikely for any property resumption costs, and therefore council would need to fund that themselves, and that it's unlikely that any external funding would be provided without some contribution towards the project from council. Ultimately, what that percentage is a bit unknown, subject to further discussions. To support council in assessing affordability, we have tried to provide a few different funding scenarios. Those scenarios are shown up on the screen and described in our business case. Again, they're not actual scenarios, they're purely just there to provide a few different benchmarks for council to have a look at. Scenario 1 looks at a capital expenditure of about just over 29 million, which is about 15% of the overall project outturn costs. That's on the assumption council would have to fund the early works package and resumptions. And then the assumption in that scenario is that the state and federal governments, or who have the external funding support, that they will pick up the rest, which is another $164 million, so about 84% of the project. We then step down through the scenario. Scenario 2 is then looking at council contributing the early works plus a further 10% of the overall construction contract, bringing council's contribution to 46 million, approximately just under 24% of the overall outturn costs. And then a final scenario showing council contributing the early works plus 20% of the main contract, bringing council's contribution up to, 62 million, which is about 30%. What we've then looked at is council, their finance department has supported us in assessing what that might mean for the ratepayers and having to obviously get funding to support some of those contributions. The scenarios are based on rateable property, so we've shown council scenarios if that cost was to be shared across the whole ratepayer base, the whole LGA, and we've also shown a scenario if that was to be funded only by ratepayers in the Emerald Township area. In saying all this, the numbers obviously can change, so it would be up to council if they were to go ahead with this project to make a final decision on how many properties or whether there would be a scaled contribution moving forward. Council's provided us with an assumption of 100% borrowing with an interest rate of 3.8%, which is the current rate used by council for their loans over a 20-year loan repayment period. We've provided some information there on annual loan repayments for council to consider. So in scenario 1, we're looking at about $2.1 million per annum loan repayments, all the way down to scenario 3, which is about just under $4.5 million per annum loan repayments. And then we provided the total payable, including interest, across the 20 years there as well. Incorporating the loan repayments, so the interest, redemption, depreciation, O&M, all of that together, we have provided some indications of the cost to individual ratepayers, depending if council were to try and spread the contribution over the full LGA or just the Emerald Township. So in scenario 1, we're looking at $255 per annum to a cost to a ratepayer if it was across the full LGA, all the way up to approximately $550 per ratepayer if it were to be across the full, across just the Emerald Township. That's for scenario 1, which is obviously only about a 15% contribution towards the project. So if you go down to scenario 3, which is obviously a greater contribution from council, then those dollars increase to about $415 per annum across the full LGA, up to about $890 if it was spread just over the Emerald Township. That's for the first 20 years where obviously where the loan is being repaid, and then after that 20 years, though, it's anticipated that would reduce to somewhere around that $105 to $227 per annum, which would obviously cover the depreciation costs and ongoing operations costs for the project. In terms of conclusions, the business case, hopefully there's quite a lot of information in there and the associated technical reports, but to try and summarise all this into a couple of key findings. From everything that we've done, the project still remains technically viable and would obviously reduce flooding significantly up to that DFE event for Emerald Township. The project, as we all know, will impact on privately owned land along the alignment and will require resumptions. It will alter flood behaviour and increase flood heights for some properties, and again we've shown that in the hydraulic assessment report. The economic evaluation suggests that the project is marginal, as I mentioned earlier, and as you can see, the cost would indicate that the project requires significant investment, possibly from all 3 levels of government to proceed with the project.
Thanks, Ken. And before I refer back to the Mayor, I know there'll be a number of questions. That was a good presentation, and it's good to have the report. I acknowledge it's in draft format. It answers a lot of questions, but it also poses a few more. And I'd just like to make a brief comment. This is probably the biggest issue this council and the last council have had to wrestle with. And we're at a point now where we have enough information to be able to consider making a decision. And I just want to say that in hindsight, we do lots of things differently. But when you look back at the evolution of what's occurred since the last 2 significant flood events, there's been a lot of money spent with consultancy and on gaining information and building our knowledge base to get where we are today. So it's easy to judge and say, well, we could have done things differently, but it's hard when you're on the journey. I've just done a quick flick through, you might have noticed earlier on. There's been no less than 35 significant decisions made since late 2012 regarding flood mitigation or flood protection or levees or excavation. So it's been definitely the number 1 topic that we've had to grapple with. I just wanted to make those couple of points known, and I'll hand it to lead us through questions.
Thank you very much, guys. And as most people here would appreciate, obviously this process, and I use that term loosely, started after or in 2012, after I suppose you'd say the recovery from the 2010-11 event closed off. From a personal perspective, I was involved with being chair of the 2008 and the 2010-11 event, and I've watched lots of people contribute a lot to this process and diligently followed through. As you can appreciate, from 2012, the flood protection, so the floodplain study was formulated by some KBR work, and that I suppose you'd say the feasibility study for then what came out of that, the scenario 15 or the levee system that we're looking at today, scenario 15, came out of that, and obviously ACOM now are actually providing a business case around that particular option. So whilst there'll be a lot of technical data today and a lot of consideration, and this has happened over a long period of time, the reality is it's been a very diligent process about making sure that when you make decisions, and when their decisions are as impactful as this one is, that it's done properly. And there's lots of people over a long period of time that have contributed above and beyond to make sure that they weren't only presenting this in a manner that was technical and dispassionate, but also probably involved their hearts in this community. And a lot of the work that's been done. There's been over 100 consultancies involved in this process since that time. There's a lot of data stored here, and it is very, very valuable to this community. There's, as Ben talked about in that report, and what some of you may have read, there's a lot of geotechnical information, our knowledge of the riverine system around here. As much as we may or may not want to know about it, we now have an absolutely implicit knowledge of that. In terms of our floodwatering systems, in terms of our mitigation projects that we have that have been ongoing, it's been very, very comprehensive. So the reality is there's been a lot of things happening over a long period of time. And there are some people that have obviously toiled away at this, and there are people in this organisation and councillors that have certainly spent a lot of time making sure this option was thoroughly investigated, and this is a chance to have it examined today. So councillors, no one owns this project, it belongs to us all. And I guess if councillors have any questions or any comments to make after Ben's report. Yes, Councillor Robb.
Having read through all of this stuff, I noticed that there's questions about asking for the removal of footbridge and the rail bridge, raising the rail bridge, etc. I couldn't find anywhere where there's removal of the John Gay Bridge or raising of.
So in the modelling completed for the levee project itself, the assumption is that all of the remaining bridges remain in place, so existing conditions, and then we're showing what the levee would do on top of that under the current conditions. There has been some modelling completed by KBR as well, which we've also had a look at here, which then looks at the implications of bridge removal. At this stage, the John Gay Bridge wasn't considered to be removed in those scenarios, purely because the hydraulic loss across that bridge being completely drowned is fairly minor. In terms of what that means for the levee business case, as I said, that's not considered as part of this project. But that would have to be a decision from council moving forward whether the John Gay Bridge would need to be raised similarly as the Vince Lester and other bridges. And I know that's a separate discussion, a separate matter that council are looking at the moment.
Thanks. Councillor Robb. Any other questions, comments?
Mr Mayor, this is probably a question for Scott or Gerard, but how will members of the community be able to obtain copies of this report other than via the agenda on the council website? There is a lot of information here, and I'm sure people would like to take it home and digest it.
Through the mayor, councillors and public, as of this afternoon, there will be a lot of information provided on our website, My Flood Info, and obviously all the other media outlets that council have. The size of the reports make it impossible for us to load it onto the web, and unfortunately we reverted to the option of having a portal or a link that you can request the information and we'll mail it out to you on a USB. That is the comprehensive report. So the only report that will be on the web will be the business case. The rest of the data will be provided by USB by request, and as I said, we'll wait to make sure whoever requests a copy will get a USB with all their data on it. It is quite, most of the reports are quite sizable and beyond the realm of downloading off the web.
So I guess to add to that, I mean, you'll obviously see in Ben's report there, there's significant flood modelling, and of course those poles particularly are 5 and 6 and 10 metres on their own. So obviously that makes it difficult, but I mean, I'm sure, you know, and people in this room that have been obviously engaged with Dana Glasby over the last number of years will have seen some of the information, but certainly it will be of some interest to see the balance of some of those consultancy reports. So thank you, Gal, for that. Yeah, Councillor Bell.
Just a Gerard and maybe Scott, but on the BCR, the BCR, you know, the business case report, Ben's indicating Ben's indicating something like a 0.97. So what would be the minimum, I suppose, that we would take to government normally, you know, or anybody else, any other partner, in regards to being a case that you would, I suppose, be able to really back with your heart and soul? Most of the stuff I've seen has been in the 3 and 4s, but I just don't know what your feeling.
Yeah, through the mayor, and I will get Ben to comment on it. The higher the benefit cost ratio, the better. It has to at least be greater than 1 to be considered. But in the case of structural mitigation protection for a township, it's been proven that it needs to be significantly higher to be given the attention or financial support from other tiers of government. But Ben has got more contemporary feedback on what a BCR should be for a successful levy case.
Yeah, I'll probably add to what Scott's saying. So it's obvious that this council is looking at flood mitigation projects, but there's a number of other councils also vying for that similar money from external funding partners. And as you'd be aware, there's a number of councils right next door to you that are also looking at these sort of projects at the moment. So in terms of competition for external funding, it's quite intense. And other projects, as an example, the South Rocky Flood Levee, which some of you probably see in the papers at the moment, you know, to do a comparison, that's a BCR at the moment at 1.5, just direct benefits only. And the likelihood is that that BCR is probably going to go up a bit because it's going to offset the need for a fairly major TMR project. Purely that's just one project, just to give you an example, that's the kind of project that they're looking for funding for and this council would be competing against. So.
It would be fair to say then too that there are other councils right across the state, particularly down the southeast, that have got requests in for funding for flood mitigation projects.
Yeah, turn your mic.
It's on.
Speak into the bit more if you can.
So what I was saying, it's fair to say that there certainly are other regional councils, particularly down around the southeast, who have been working on flood mitigation projects for quite some time, that have got big business cases before the government right now with better ratios than us, that have been unsuccessful in terms of securing funding. So with the BCR where we are, I would say 2 chances of securing funding, that would be bucklers and none.
Yeah, I won't comment on the chances because obviously that would, I'd be taking a guess, but you're right in saying that, yeah, as ACOM, we're involved with a number of other LGAs, as you said, down the southeast corner, but also north of here that are vying for flood mitigation funding, they've got business cases and they've got economic evaluations that are looking to secure support. I just can't comment on obviously how funders would look upon this particular project.
No. But I suppose, and a comment that we've made amongst ourselves before, is if someone came at you with an investment of this nature, there wouldn't be anyone in this room that would touch it with a stick in terms of cost-benefit ratio.
So Gerard, could you answer that too? I mean, I'll just ask for a comment from you in regards to major infrastructure stuff that we normally would go to government or other people. What's our normal PCR?
Through the mayor, councillors, our track record with winning, building our region funding and other funding, our business cases have all had significantly higher benefit cost ratios than what we're producing now. So we've been successful with applications with BCRs 2, 3 plus. So it is just the nature of the beast. State and federal funding is only considered projects that demonstrate a significant benefit to the investment that they are considering funding.
Through the chair, Gerard, or maybe Ben, there's been a number of mitigation projects that have been performed by the council since 2010-11 flood. Have you got any sort of comments around what impact that would have with the modelling if the flood was to happen again, that flood to happen again?
I'm going through the chair aspect. We have a slide where we show the differential, and you don't have it up. The that difference in afflux.
The council have requested us to also assess the implications of works completed to date, and we have done some initial modelling to show council basically that there has been a reduction in flood height due to the works that have been completed. So we're talking about the river excavation and clearing works, the works on the rail line, etc. So yeah, they are anticipated and even through the modelling shown to reduce flood heights for the township. And we have assessed that based on the direct tangible damage as well in terms of what the estimate of reduction in tangible damage might be. The estimate at this stage is approximately 1.3, from memory, $1.3 million a year reduction in damages for Emerald. To put that in perspective, KBR and others have done floodplain management plans which suggest that current average annual damage for Emerald Township is about $10.2 million a year. So the works that council's completed to date, which is in the order of $7 million investment, has reduced damage approximately 1.3, I think it is $1.3 million per annum for the community. So it has gone away to obviously start to reduce that flood damage and reduce flood heights associated with that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors?
Was there a benefit in building a larger levee or smaller levees?
Again, that's a good question, and the choice of flood immunity is a pretty key one when it comes to flood levees. We have assessed the so basically going to a lower level of flood immunity, so something equivalent to a 2010 level of event plus freeboard. That was also a consideration and a question posed by the state government when we met with them. We have done some further assessment and some initial economic evaluation which suggests that council just wouldn't be obtaining very high benefits for going to a levy that was lesser down to that 2010 immunity. The tangible damage reduction for this current reference project, as I said earlier, was about $5 million a year reduction in flood damages. That's the estimate. A 2010 level immune levy was only about again, sorry, but I'm going off numbers, but it was $1 to $2 million per annum. So it was a significant drop down, I guess, is what I'm saying, in estimated benefits. And given that this project is struggling to make a positive ECR, going a lesser immune flood levy is going to be even worse in terms of economic outcomes from what we've seen.
Thanks, Ben. Any other questions? Well, councillors, well, I think there's certainly this is an agenda item that certainly has gravity. As I said, in terms of longevity, has had a real impact on our community for a number of years. What I'd like to do, if I could, I'll ask them to maybe step through the recommendation that was extended today, or in the agenda today, and we'll read through that before we actually make our decision. So thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's a lengthy recommendation, and essentially there's 4 components to it, and I would like to read it out verbatim. For those who'd like to, you can follow it on one of the screens. This is what's proposed, that the Central Highlands Regional Council, number 1, receive the draft business case report Emerald Flood Protection Scheme. Part 2, resolve not to pursue construction of flood mitigation levies for the township of Emerald. The draft business case report Emerald Flood Protection Scheme demonstrates an insufficient benefit cost ratio. Essentially, the cost of building, operating and maintaining levies exceeds the potential direct benefits, namely reduced flood damage, social and agricultural land impacts, and residual value benefits to the community. The indirect benefits of reduced insurance premiums and improved property values, while marginal, are unproven. Part 3, that the Central Highlands Regional Council acknowledge that Council has completed and sponsored a number of flood mitigation projects since 2010 to the value of $7.3 million, which has cumulatively achieved significant flood mitigation benefits, including enlarging the Queensland Rail Bridge opening by 62.5 square metres on the western side of the Nagoa River. That should be cubic metres. Undertaking tree thinning at multiple sites within the Nagoa River. Upgrading the culverts under Clermont Street opposite the Fitzgerald Street Rail Tunnel. Desilting and reinstatement of left Nagoa 1 drain profile from Hogan's Road to Tyson's Road to its original 10% annual exceedance probability designed by Sunwater. Raising New Street as an evacuation route. Excavating 270,000 cubic metres from the Nagoa River at sites 2, 3, 10 and 11, and installing additional early warning flood alert combined river and rain gauges upstream of Emerald at Van Dyke, Patrona, Tungellowa, Glenlee, Serpentine, and installing redundancy or backup gauges at Cragmore and Emerald. And the last part of the resolution, that Central Highlands Regional Council pursue the following projects and strategies. Further advocate to the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads to raise the Vince Lester Bridge as a primary evacuation route for the town of Emerald to 179 metres Australian height datum. This achieves connection level with Opal Street at 178.9 and by estimation would result in approximately 390 previously inundated residential and commercial buildings not experiencing overflow flooding in a repeat of the 2010-2011 flood event. Advocate to DTMR, that's the Department of Transport and Main Roads, raising the Nagoa River Queensland Rail Bridge. Advocate to DTMR for the removal of the existing timber footbridge over the Nagoa River. Continued and ongoing liaison with the Insurance Council of Australia regarding the modelled cumulative benefits of all flood mitigation projects to date. Engage with Sunwater, DTMR, and DTMR that should be, to increase the capacity of the LM1 drainage system to allow conveyance of additional water to double its present capacity, including hydraulic improvements to structures traversing the Gregory Highway. Investigate mitigation options at the Selma Weir breakout. Further development of our existing early warning flood alert network for the Nagoa River and Teresa Creek catchments. Public education and awareness about flood safety and evacuation. Complete the development of an evacuation plan for the town of Emerald and surrounds, and seek funding that will enable additional vegetation thinning and clearing, as well as excavation of the Nagoa River. So there it is, Council. That's the proposed recommendation that makes a decision regarding levee banks, acknowledges the work that's been done that has an impact or a benefit to the community, and the last and most robust part of the recommendation is a number or a multitude of strategies that Council will undertake.
Well, councillors, as I said, that's a fairly lengthy recommendation. I think this council particularly has made very clear its intentions in terms of making this decision. We were disappointed last year that when we came to our community that in November that this wasn't ready, and we insisted that this was going to be today. And today will be about making a decision. Councillors, this is something that I saw in the faces of people in 2008. It was a time when, quite frankly, I saw this community suffer very badly, and I don't want people to suffer that same uncertainty anymore. And I'm certainly moving this from the chair. So I'm going to move this resolution today. Would someone like to second it? Councillor McIndoe. All in favour? Against? Thank you very much. Unanimous. And thank you everyone. Look, I think, you know, an occasion like this, this is very important to me. There was a very important responsibility that I took on on two occasions, and it changed my life, and I don't want to see my community suffer any more than it has. This is about giving a community that I've talked to, certainly in the last 12 months, a great deal of certainty. Those people that are sitting in this gallery here, whose lives have been affected by the footprint of levees, that they can get on with their life. I know Noel and Margaret Mallon celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary this week, and it might be nice for them to go home tonight and know that they can spend the rest of their life in their house. And I think that'll be an important thing for all of us. For those people that are going to be a little bit disappointed today that perhaps we're not going to do these, it's about the fact that they've asked their council to thoroughly examine an option, and we've done that prudently. This council, the last council, and the council before that to make sure that obviously in assessing this, they did the right thing and took it right through dispassionately, looked at the figures, looked at the numbers, looked at public safety, and made sure that they came to the right decision. It's important too that the community knows the cost of this. All of us live within our means. We are all wanting to protect our life and property, but at the end of the day, we also know that we've got to be able to afford that. We are people that understand that better than anyone. There are other options in our community. There are things we can do that can make our lives better, and we are going to do those. So today for us, whilst it's very important that this decision has been made, it's about this council doesn't have that luxury. We've got to keep doing those things that we told you that we're going to do, and we are going to do them. We've got some advanced discussions with TMR. We're very, very hopeful that those sorts of things are going to come to fruition. Also, the work that your councils have been doing, the work that's been done today, as Ben pointed out, $7.3 million. I know lots of people have lots of opinions about that, but at the end of the day, those works have proven they are very beneficial to this community, and it's reduced mitigation to a certain number of properties. The other works we're going to take will also prove mitigation to a lot of properties. And finally, all this data that's been collected has a value. As I said before, that data is something that this community can use to protect itself. As Ben talked about earlier, as councillors have asked today, there are other options, and we will look at them all, and we will not stop till we find that we can get the best solutions in the most practical, sensible way. And that's all we've ever told you we're going to do, and that's what we've done today. So look, and I thank people going right back to 2012, as I said, for their efforts. For all those people in this community that actually engaged with us, knowing that full well it was their properties that were in the firing line, and they still participated because they wanted to make sure that this community had the best chance at protecting themselves. Thank you very much for that. As I said, it's a great thing you've done. And I just hope today that this decision is something that you'll appreciate very much, because it's been very difficult for us. And I hope, as Steve Gillespie said at the start of this, we prayed for wisdom and the right decision, and I hope today it's done that for all of you people. So thank you.
I just like to thank Kerry. I know you're very emotional about this, and I'm sure I feel the same way as well, but thank you very much for that wrap up. I think you did perfectly well. Congratulations. Thank you.
Well, I hate to say this, everyone, but it's back to the drawing board for us. Look, to all those people that have attended this afternoon, thank you very much for your time. And if you don't mind, we might just adjourn for 5 minutes, and if people want to get a grip on themselves. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll resume the meeting in a few moments. Thank you.
6.5 years. 6.5 years of misery. Oh,